On this episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, we're following along with a father and his two sons and a bunch of good friends as they revive an old 57 Chevy drag car that's been tucked away for over 30 years. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know that every old drag car has a story. Even the parts and pieces have stories. And this car is no different. It's a 57 Chevy two-door post drag car. It's owned by Ray Portman of Louisville, Kentucky. He's owned this thing for decades. And it actually sat in the back corner of his garage since about 1984. To tell you a little bit more about this car, its drag racing history dates back to the late 60s. And at the time, it was being raced at National Trail Raceway in Columbus, Ohio. And it ran in the super stock and stock eliminator ranks through about the early 70s. When the car became outdated, a guy by the name of Bobby Jones bought it. He had actually worked part-time at National Trail Raceway, so he got to see lots of cool cars up close and personal, but this 57 always stood out to him. A little while later, Bobby moved back to his old hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, and he reunited with his buddy Ray Portman. Of course, the 57 came up in conversation right off the bat, and Ray jumped in as a partner on the car, and these two guys, they went racing. They raced all over the Louisville area and other Kentucky tracks. They raced at US 60, they raced at Ohio Valley, they raced at Beach Bend, and they mainly bracket raced the car, but it was very competitive. It had a killer small block in it, and they set it up for 8th mile racing because that's what most of their local tracks were set up for, and this car would scream. It had 617 gears in it. Unfortunately, Bobby passed away unexpectedly, and Ray kept on racing it for a little while, but he eventually stopped racing in 1984. Around this time, Ray was transitioning more into street rods and customs, and the old 57 just kind of moved to the back corner of the garage. Luckily, he didn't get rid of it. He didn't part it out or do anything crazy, but the car didn't really serve much of a purpose for about 30 years. Of course, it was a conversation piece. There was lots of good bench racing, good stories being told about it, but it didn't really get a lot of use while Ray was concentrating on other projects. Also around this time, Ray's two sons, Mark, who everybody knew as Meatball, Steve, who everybody knew as Weasel, those guys were crazy about cars at an early age. They grew up around them, and obviously growing up around a drag car, you're gonna like that kind of stuff. So they had memories of this car, although they had also transitioned into street rods and pro street cars and custom trucks and stuff like that, but they appreciated the old 57. The revival of this car was a group effort from a ton of Louisville hot rodders, but the guy that kind of led the pack was Jeremy Thompson. He turned a lot of wrenches on this car, and he helped Ray be motivated to get it out. He helped him tune it. He helped do a lot of things to get this car back on the road again. This engine looks awesome. It's got the gold anodized Moroso valve covers, white Stahl fender well headers. This thing looks legit because it is legit. It's a 327 base small block Chevrolet. It's been bored 30 over. That makes it a 331 cubic inch combination. It's got a forged crankshaft. It's got pink rods. It's got Arius dome pistons. It's got 461 double hump heads on it. And the port work on those heads is something that Bobby Jones did many, many years ago. It still has the old school Cam Dynamics solid lift cam in it, but the top end does have some updates. It's got an Edelbrock Victor Jr. intake and 650 Holley carburetor on it. Underneath, the car is mostly untouched since the 70s. It's got Moroso trick springs, it's got 90-10 shocks, it's got 2-inch ball joint spacers. Out back, it's got D-arch leaf springs, homemade slapper bars. These are attached to the original 57 Chevy rear end, which, as I told you earlier, has got 617 gears in it. They did update the braking system. They took the old single pot master cylinder off of it. They put a dual reservoir master cylinder and disc brakes on the front. They also updated the tires and wheels, but they kept the old school look. They went with 15x4 and 15x8 inch Krager SS wheels, and it's got Mickey Thompson tires on it. It's got skinny front runners and then 29.5 by 9 inch slicks on the back. Perfect combination for this car. You'll notice that it doesn't have a big old straight axle. It doesn't have radius wheel wells on the back. You know, this is not to really be confused with a gasser. Even though it's an old school drag car, this is more of what you would have seen in the super stock ranks, or maybe like the junior stock ranks, which is the lower level of stock eliminator. Other updates include a 6-point roll bar and 5-point harnesses. These guys were serious about taking it back to the track. They wanted it to be legal and legit and safe, and they did it the right way. And you know, they didn't waste any time. As soon as the car was running again, they fine-tuned it and they took it to the drag strip and beat on this thing. After a few passes, they were able to get it down to a 735 at 95 miles an hour, which is right on target of what this car ran back in the day. After the boys had their fun on the drag strip, they started taking this car everywhere. They went to the Tri-5 Nationals, they went to the Hot Rod Reunion and the Street Rod Nationals, all sorts of local shows and cruise-ins. They were just having a blast taking this car, telling its story, and just, you know, bench racing with the old guys and enjoying that time looking back at the history of this car. And, you know, even though these guys were just having the time of their lives, there was still an uneasy feeling because Weasel was sick, and it was bad. It was a pretty bad diagnosis, and it was one of those things that, you know, his days were limited. And, you know, he couldn't get out and enjoy those times, those hot days in the summertime. He couldn't get out and enjoy those days quite as much as his brother and his dad. But, you know, at the same time, he still enjoyed seeing the pictures. He enjoyed knowing that this car was getting out there and being seen and being enjoyed again. Weasel passed away in 2017, and obviously that left a huge empty space in the Portman's life. You know, they were really close, and they were really passionate about the same things. You know, they were hot rodders, and it was a pretty devastating loss for the family and all the friends in the area. And, you know, what was really sad to me is that not long after that, Meatball had a really bad diagnosis as well. He had cancer. It was just a really unfortunate series of events. Even though there was tons of happiness about the revival of this car and the closeness of the family and the closeness of all the friends and the new friends they had made through the years, but there was so much devastation in the Portman family just in those couple of years, because Weasel passed away in 2017 and Meatball passed away in 2019. And, you know, I just got to say this, I didn't know Weasel all that well, but Meatball was the kind of guy that never met a stranger. And I had originally kind of met him, I guess you could say, on Facebook, but, you know, he's just the type of guy, if you ran into him at a car show and just said, hey, somehow or another he would come out with a conversation and you would be friends by the time it was over. And that's how I felt when I did the photo shoot on this car. You know, I spent some time there with Meatball. He was just like my best friend. He was everybody's best friend. And, you know, I think that's what everybody misses the most is having their best friend around at car shows and drag races and stuff. And obviously, you know, for the Portman family, it's been tough. You know, the good thing is that the car is here, the car survives, the car continues to live on, and it proves again, you know, these old cars aren't just machines. I mean, they're part of the family. And in this case, the Portman family, this 57 Chevrolet, it continues their legacy. It continues telling their stories. It continues their lives. And you know, I'm thrilled that they were able to experience the time that they did with their dad and time, you know, showing this thing off. So I wanted to share that story here. I wanted to share a little bit of the history of the car, although I don't have a ton of old pictures of it, but mainly just tell you about how great of a car this is, how much it means to the Portman family, and that's what I love. I love anything that's got a story, and you're not going to find a whole lot better story than Ray Portman and his old school Survivor 57 Chevy drag car.